Side 6, Xone of Contention, by Piers Anthony. Continuing on page 179. I'd better have Etzel along. He's sharp with puns and riddles.
We will all come along, including Para, but the challenges will surely be directed at you.
The boat approached the castle. It looked conventional as such things went, with a cleared region, a moat, and an inner wall. It looks peaceful enough, Pia said.
That would be deceptive.
A toothy head on a serpentine neck rose from the water of the moat. Oh, look, Brianna cried, delighted. The moat monster. You like moat monsters? Pia asked her. Sure. They're an endangered species. There are only 3 castles in Xanth with formal moats, and one of them is Castle Zombie, which isn't suitable for a living monster. So it's between Castle Rugna and the Good Magician's castle. Souffle shuffles between them. But this is a different one. Probably because I know Souffle wouldn't really eat a person, so the moat wouldn't be secure. This one will eat a person? Pia asked, feeling slightly unwell. For sure. Isn't it great?
Brianna favors the classic elements, Justin explained. So much is changing in Xanth that it's nice to see some old conventions retained.
Like people getting eaten by moat monsters, Pia said, with attempted irony.
Precisely. This merely means we must not venture into the moat.
The drawbridge is down, Pia said.
Yes, that is the obvious crossing point.
So something will stop us from crossing it?
That seems likely.
I wish we had a handbook with instructions, Pia said.
Etzel reached out to pick something up. Maybe this is it.
She looked. It was a book, made of hands. There was no print in it. She opened her mouth. I know, Etzel said quickly, setting the book down. Sick joke. Can't read it. I guess it makes me an illiterate. She had to smile. It was hard to stay mad at him. Well, let's just keep going and see what stops us. Para advanced toward the bridge. But then a barrier of sorts appeared. It seemed to be a low table with plates and bread set on it. The butter knives were yellow. In fact, they seemed to be made of butter. That figured. The boat stopped as the table crossed the path and was a bit too high for the short duck legs to navigate. In any event, it wouldn't do to walk on a dining table. Pia looked to the sides, but they were steep and apparently slippery banks, not suitable for walking across. The way was straight ahead. Beyond was the bridge, which remained lowered. Pia climbed out of the boat. The others joined her. Has Brianna been explaining this to you? She asked Etzel. For sure, he said, with half a smile. They've been through it before, so it's really us who will have to handle 3 challenges this time. We'll need to keep our wits about us. This table blocks the way, so it must be a challenge. What do you make of it? It looks like lunch at a restaurant, but somehow I don't think we're supposed to eat those tarts. They're not tarts, they're bread rolls. Roll, roll, roll your boat, he said in a sing-song. Gently down the stream. She stamped her foot. This is serious, Ed. What do we do to pass the challenge? What's the challenge? I don't know. He decided he had teased her enough. There must be some hint of a problem and of a solution. We just have to see it. For sure, she said somewhat acidly. Let's experiment. He sat cross-legged by the table and reached for one of the pieces of bread. It put down legs and ran away from his hand. Pia was less surprised than she would have been had she not seen the pie and ears by the gap chasm. The inanimate all too often became animate in Xanth. So you're not for eating, Etzel said. What are you for? The things on the table came to life. Rolls of assorted types and sizes walked to the center of the table. Then one sprouted hands and picked up a little pastry cowboy hat, putting it on. The bread strutted around in the manner of a tough cowboy. A second one picked up a fancy lady's hat, preening. A fourth found a crown and started lording it over the other bread. They seem to be playing a game, Pia said, mystified, acting out parts. Etzel looked at her. By George, I think she's got it, he said. stop clowning around. These breads are playing a game, he said carefully. A role-playing game. Stop joking, she snapped. This is serious. No joke, P. See, they have settled down. It was true. The bread was inert again, without arms or legs. Etzel's stupid comment must have satisfied a requirement. But the table remained. It must be my turn, Pia said. She sat down by the table, folding her legs carefully under her so as not to show more than was proper. She reached for a roll. It rolled away. Was that a pun? A roll rolling? So she put out both hands, attempting to corral another one. It sprouted legs and ran away before she could catch it. All right, she said. What are you for? The bread came to life. One roll picked up some cloth and draped it around itself. It walked across the table, turned with flair, and walked back. Then another took the cloth and walked the same way, with exaggerated steps. It's almost sexy, Etzel said. Don't be coarse. But his crude remark triggered a revelation. They are models, she said. Role models. All the rolls went inert. The table settled into the ground and disappeared, leaving the breads strewn across the path. I think that did it, Brianna said. You each figured out one of the puns. Now we can eat the bread. She picked up a roll and took a bite from it. There was no protest. Pia felt uneasy about it, but tried it herself. The roll she picked up was just that, inanimate bread. She picked up the butter knife, inserted the blade, and broke it off inside the bread, thus buttering it. She nibbled, and it tasted fresh and good. Maybe the animation was illusion, Etzel said. This is good stuff. There is a lot of illusion in Xanth, Justin said. It can be extremely useful. It wasn't what I expected, Pia said, but it was indeed a challenge. For sure, the other three said together. They ate the rolls, then moved on to the drawbridge. It remained down, and the way across the moat seemed clear, except for one thing. The moat monster's head was now beside it, looking down. The monster could readily snap up something that tried to cross. They halted just shy of the bridge. Pia did not like the look of this. Maybe the challenge is to distract the monster so we can pass unmolested. That might work, Etzel said, but how does the last one across do it? Someone will have to stay outside, Pia said. Maybe Para. Maybe he can swim in the moat after the challenge is done. It works for me, Etzel said. Okay, you cross while I distract. He walked beside the moat until he got a fair distance away. Then he jumped and waved his arms. Hey, Snootface, come and get me! The moat monster glanced at him, then turned back to the bridge. It didn't move. Para waddled out the other way, then entered the water. The monster glanced, but made no motion in that direction. It didn't care who shared the moat. Maybe we can swim, Etzel called, instead of using the bridge. He put a toe to the water. The serpent whipped around. It swam lithely through the water. In half a moment it was there. But Etzel had hastily withdrawn his foot. Just testing, he said sheepishly. The monster writhed sinuously, reorienting on the bridge. It was clear that it could get there before a person could walk all the way across it. Etzel returned to the bridge. But you know, it might work if a person ran across, he said. It seems it is only humans the monster is after. Justin and I could distract it while you two raced across, Brianna suggested. Wouldn't that be cheating? Pia asked. If it is, you won't get across, Justin said. The good magician's challenges can't be avoided by ruse or fraud. But could be you'd be alone in the castle, Brianna warned, which is maybe okay, and we'll wait for you, but you need to be ready. Pia exchanged a glance with Etzel. Let's try it, she said. They tried it. Justin and Brianna went to the side and splashed the water. The monster went after them. They stepped back. Do we risk it? Etzel inquired. She hesitated, not at all sure this was worth the risk. Then a bulb flashed before her face. I get it. It's another pun. The human race.
We're human. We race across.
A human race, he agreed.
So it must be okay. You cracked the code.
Last one across is a rotten egg, she cried, and sprinted for the far side. He followed and soon overhauled her. But he didn't run ahead. He simply paced her, glancing to the side. She looked. The moat monster was swimming toward them, its course about to intersect. It was going to be close. She couldn't speed up. She was already doing her best and panting, and she had a side stitch. She just wasn't used to exertion like this.
I'd help you, Etzel puffed, but then it wouldn't be a race.
And it had to be a race. She nodded and struggled on. The monster's head struck. She heard its teeth clash right behind her. Then they were across, and she felt herself falling, but couldn't stop. Etzel caught her and held her up.
We made it, he said. I don't think the monster really tried. It knew we had solved the pun.
She just hung in his arms and panted. There were times when it was nice to have his physical support. As her bleary gaze wandered across the moat, she saw the monster sink under the water. Its job was done. Justin, Brianna, and Para crossed the bridge, unmenaced. They were not a true part of the challenge. Pia caught her breath and her balance, and turned to look at the castle from up close. The detail differed from what she had thought, or maybe it had changed. The stone wall was now rounded, probably circling the castle, and had arched doorways every few feet. This seemed remarkably porous for a defensive rampart. She looked at the moat. There were docks extending into it all along, as if ready for many boats at once. Some were tall, standing well above the waterline. Others were barely above the water. Why the difference in height? Pia asked. Etzel shrugged. Must be high piers and low piers for tall and short ships. Ships? Here? It's a moat, she reminded him witheringly. He nodded. In any event, we are past the moat, so I don't think it's a challenge. Maybe the third challenge is farther in, Etzel said. We may be certain that it will manifest in its own manner, Justin said. I think that Brianna and I had better wait here while you explore. Pia walked to the nearest archway. As she reached it, a centaur appeared with a man on his back. The centaur had a bow, and the man had a spear. You shall not pass, both said together. Pia retreated. I think it just manifested, she said. For sure, Brianna agreed. Let me try, Etzel said. He walked to the next portal beyond. There was the centaur, without the man. I regret to say that you are not permitted to pass, he said politely. Pia walked past that one and tried the third aperture. The man appeared. Forget it, he said gruffly. Who are you? She asked, striking a winsome pose. I am Christopher. And you are? I am Pia Putz. She smiled and saw him soften. Are you sure we can't pass? Very sure, Christopher said regretfully. Not even for a kiss? The man looked truly reluctant. Not even for that. She walked on to the next portal. There was the centaur again. Or was it really the same one? Who are you? Cyclone, the centaur growled. Now get out of here before I throw you into the moat. She retreated. The centaur looked the same, but didn't sound the same as the one who had braced Etzel. She joined Etzel. There seems to be a man or centaur blocking each passage. They look the same, but I'm not sure they are. Right. They don't talk the same. Maybe they're twins or triplets. They don't attack. They just warn us away, she said. Maybe we should check the other arches. You go one way, I'll go the other, and we'll meet on the other side. She nodded and set off. Every portal was blocked. There were 2 centaurs and several similar men. The centaurs were shy and bold, respectively, or peaceful and violent. Evidently, they trotted to whichever portal she was headed for. Maybe there was just one man, but he was everywhere, either by himself or with a centaur. She met Etzel on the far side. All blocked, she said. More men than centaurs. Christopher throughout, he said. Psi Centaur and Psi Clone, the mean one. The same ones I saw, she said. I suppose the centaurs could alternate sides, but how could the man get around so swiftly? He never looked out of breath. Etzel was thoughtful. So, is it one man, or several with the same name? And 2 centaurs, or more than 2? I think this is our riddle. Do you think there's a pun we're not getting? From what Justin told me, the challenges don't have to be puns, she said. But if it's not a pun, then what? There must be something about these people we need to understand. Like how many of them there are, really. Maybe we can narrow it down, he said. Let's go until we find 2 of them together, then. Got it, she agreed. They circled together back the way she had come. When they came to a man-centaur combination, Pia stayed to talk with them, putting on her winsome air and holding their attention. She had always been good at this sort of thing, and with her lovely 16-year-old face and figure, she was better, because she knew exactly how to use these assets. She had never tried fascinating a centaur before, but they had enough human attributes to be subject to some wiles. She smiled. She moved her hips. She gushed over their masculine appeal. She lifted a leg to adjust her shoe, and leaned well forward, showing just enough thigh and breast to guarantee continued attention. It was a science that worked well enough in the land of magic. Meanwhile, Etzel faded away. She gave him as much time as she could, keeping the 2 males anchored in place. Then Etzel returned. She bid the males farewell with a last smile and jiggle, and stepped back. They departed the archway and were no more. She turned to Etzel. What's the story? There's another set 4 arches down, Christopher and Clone. The mean centaur, she agreed. I had the shy one. I almost made him blush once. So there are 2 different centaurs, and 2 of the same men. We have established a minimum, she said. Could there be more? I think there could be, but how can they be the same? Something was nagging at the edge of her mind. Suddenly it connected. Clone. Clones, he repeated, catching on. 1 centaur, 1 man, but they can send clones out to intercept any doorway. They might be illusions, looking and sounding just like the originals. But they certainly seemed solid, Pia said. We could walk right through illusions, but I wouldn't want to try it with solid folk. For sure, he agreed with a third of a smile. I'll bet the clones cover every portal instantly. Then the solid originals come to replace them as we talk. That way, just 2 can block 100 entrances. So when we see both together and talk with them, they become the originals? She asked. I think so. Then how were we able to talk to both in 2 different places simultaneously? He looked at her. Sometimes I think you're not a complete idiot. This was his way of saying that she had caught him in an error. And sometimes I think you're not completely ugly, she said, returning tit for tat. But how do we rise to the challenge? There has to be a way, he said. I think that if we could fix the 2 originals in one place, we could walk right through the 2 clones elsewhere, because they can't really be in 2 places at one time. Only the illusion clones can zip instantly to new doors. Except that we both talk to them both, she reminded him. Or can an illusion clone talk? Without a solid mouth or lungs? I doubt it. Though with magic, anything's possible. Maybe one of each pair was the original, and the other was a clone. I wonder, she said, getting into the problem. She was exercising her intellect, and Etzel wasn't disparaging it. She liked that. She had never been known or valued for her mind, limited as it was. You know those old cartoons, where only the person who is speaking or doing something is animated, and the others are just still pictures? Could they be like that, so we can tell who's the clone? Pia, I'd kiss you except that you wouldn't like it by daylight. He meant when she wasn't honoring their deal, giving him everything at night in return for his complete support by day. Part of what turned her off was his clear superiority of brain. But now they were thinking together. I'd like it now, she said. He was wary. What's different now? You're treating me like an equal. He laughed, then quickly sobered, realizing that it wasn't a joke. Have I been a fool all this time?
Tit for tat. You wanted the one without giving the other.
For sure, he agreed, without any trace of a smile.
She waited, and after a moment he embraced her and kissed her. He didn't try to grab a feel. She gave back, making him melt. He released her. Oh, Pia. She liked him a lot better this way. Her emotion was stirring, after being in remission for some time. She had always known that her body was her main appeal, but she didn't like being considered only a body. However, this was not the time to get into this. We have a challenge to surmount.
More than one, he said. He reoriented. One original, one clone for each door.
Which one were you talking to?
She focused on the memory of her recent dialogue. Now she realized something she hadn't noticed at the time.
The man, Christopher. He reacted. He talked.
The centaur just stood there. I thought he was reacting, but now I realize he was just there. You adjusted your shoe? He was, of course, well familiar with the move and loved it. Sometimes she thought he would rather sneak a peek under her skirt than see her all the way naked.
Yes, I think my panties showed at one point, but they didn't freak out.
They must be immune for the purpose of this challenge. The good magician must have had lovely girls try to dodge before, to get past male defenders.
But I did hold their attention. The man's attention, anyway.
Cyclone just kept looking as before. I thought because he didn't look away that I was fascinating him, but he was really a cartoon still figure. I talked to Psy Centaur. He's smart and interested in mundane technology. The man was there, but I don't think he ever spoke. So I think he was the clone image. We each talked to one real person.
And we could have walked through the clone, she agreed, except that the real one would have stopped us.
But something bothered her. We figured chances are that the first one we see in a doorway is a clone, and that as we talk, the original comes to take his place. That's my theory. The clones can go instantly, spotting us. Then the real ones come to stop us. Probably pretty soon, so we couldn't just walk through the clones.
But they are responsive from the start.
Doesn't that mean that the clones can be animated? Etzel paused. May I kiss you again?
Kisses for sex appeal I can handle. Kisses for respect I like.
Then you'll like this one. He kissed her again, and there was indeed a special kind of passion in it. Then he worked it out. It must be that they can focus on their clones, seeing what the clones see, and making them move and talk. But I'll bet they can do a meaningful dialogue only through one clone at a time. They must do it while they are closing in on that one to take its place.
And we don't dare gamble that we're talking with clones, Pia said, lest we get smashed.
I suspect they wouldn't smash us, but we'd fail the challenge and never get in to see the good magician. So we don't want to gamble. Now, if we could just attract the originals, then hold them in place while we went through a different door.
The moment we moved over, so would they, she said. But I wonder, could they be anchored through their clones?
Anchored?
Pretend you're one of them, she said. When I say go, you turn around, walk in a circle or something.
That's no problem, but I don't see go. She drew up her blouse, showing her bra. Etzel stared, as he always did. After a moment, he started to turn. She leaned forward. He froze. After another moment, he tried to turn again. She lifted a leg. He froze again. When he started to recover, she lifted her leg farther. His eyeballs began to glaze. She resumed her normal posture. His expression cleared. Point made, he said. Here in Xanth, you have power.
Maybe I can't freak them out, but I might anchor them in place for a while, she said, so they couldn't walk across to join the clones.
Good notion, but maybe you would catch only one, and the other would avert his gaze when he saw the other freeze and move in.
Then you can take out the other. Let me do the man, and you do the centaur.
But nobody would freeze if I did a striptease.
With your mind, she clarified. Say things so fascinating that the centaur is entirely distracted.
Body and mind, he agreed, smiling. Let's try it. First, we'd better get them both to one door. Then, when we figure they're there in the flesh, we can go to a random one and go into our act. I think you have figured out the key.
Agreed,
she kissed him. If he had always been like this, working with her instead of treating her like an object, their marriage might never have been in trouble. They walked to the nearest archway. Psi Centaur appeared. They walked on to the next. Christopher appeared. They went on to the next. Both man and centaur appeared.
Now, Pia breathed, anchor sight.
How are you doing? Etzel inquired of the centaur. You shall not pass. It was Cyclone, speaking without moving.
Now, is that nice of you? Pia asked the man.
It's our assignment, Christopher said, taking in her trim figure. But otherwise he did not show animation. These were clones, being operated by remote control. We believe we have figured out the key to this challenge, Etzel said. I doubt it, Clone said gruffly, flicking his tail in a disdainful manner. Now he was real.
Oh, but we do, Pia said, smiling at the man. It has been such a pleasure to meet you, however.
That's nice, Christopher said, leaning forward to take in more of the smile. He was real, too. So now it was clear where the originals were. They stepped to the left beyond the archway. The two figures therein faded. Then they ran back around the archway and on to the right, trying to fake out the Guardians about the direction they were taking. They ran by several arches, then paused close to one. The man appeared, a still image. They ran on. About 4 more arches later they found a set, Christopher and Psi Centaur. Go, Pia said. She was a trifle breathless, but that would be no liability for this. They stepped close to the still figures.
Hello, Chris,
Pia said, opening her blouse. She saw that she had his immediate attention. Psi, I want to tell you about quantum theory, Etzel said, earnestly meeting the centaur's fixed gaze. It has some fascinating properties. I had thought the theory of relativity was challenging, with its insistence that nothing could exceed the speed of light in a vacuum, and its permutations of time and gravity. But quantum physics is truly weird, almost like magic. The gazes of both man and centaur remained fixed. They were still clones. Pia stepped forward, slowly removing her blouse. She saw that Etzel didn't look, because the moment he did, he would lose his thread of dialogue. She liked that, too. Peripheral vision was more than enough. Meanwhile, he continued talking, doing his part. You see, Psi, according to quantum theory, you can't know both the position and the velocity of a given particle. The mere act of looking changes things. So if you take a snapshot, as it were, and fix its position, it is impossible to know its velocity. Sort of like a clone not moving if you know where it is. Isn't that weird? Absolutely fascinating, Psi said, unmoving. Meanwhile, Pia was nudging forward, in a kind of dance step that made the upper contour of her bosom jiggle. There was a certain art to the effect. Christopher remained fixed. Another quantum effect, Etzel continued, is that two particles separating from a common source are linked. If something happens to one, it also happens to the other, though there is no seeming connection between them. Does this make sense to you? Amazing, Psi said, without animation. Pia, having used up about as much of her top as she cared to, hiked up her skirt, showing increasing amounts of leg. The man's eyes remained riveted, though nothing else moved. He was still the clone, seeing what the clone saw, but not there physically. It makes sense if you figure that when you measure a property of one particle, you are actually choosing between realities, selecting the universe wherein both particles are the same. New universes are thus constantly fissioning off. It's a mind-bending concept. They are now making quantum machines that can do calculations much faster than anything else, Etzel continued. They are very good at probabilities. But the boundary between the realm of quantum effects and that of the ordinary world we know remains elusive. Still, study continues. Relativity relates to gravity, while quantum theory relates to the other 3 fundamental forces of the universe. Someday it may be possible to combine them into one great theory of everything.
Perhaps the superstring theory will accomplish that. Did you say 4 forces total? Sai asked. Pia was now passing Chris. She was up to her panty line, but as they had conjectured, he was not freaked out. She did, however, have his whole attention. She wiggled her bottom. Yes, of course, Etzel agreed. Gravity, the weak atomic force, the strong nuclear force, and the electromagnetic force. What about the 5th force? What 5th force? Magic. She was past Chris. Etzel was now largely past the centaur. Oh, I meant the forces of Mundania. They don't know about magic there. That would seem to explain it. Xanth could not endure without magic. I agree. It's what distinguishes it from the dreary realm beyond. It was time to wrap this up. Psst, Pia whispered. We're through. Through? Etzel asked, dismayed. I thought we were getting along so well together. Will you stop it? Through the challenge. The 2 clones faded. Pia and Etzel were indeed inside the castle. I thought... So he had been genuinely confused, rather than making one of his sharp remarks. She liked that as well. She stepped into him and kissed him. You did well. So did you. I didn't dare look. I would have freaked out. Exactly. Let's go ask the question. 9. Xone. Chlorine rode behind Nimby on the lemon cycle, enjoying it. He was quite competent now, and obeyed all the obscure signs and signals of the road. Doug and Kim drove their car behind, there to come to the rescue if there were any problem. Exactly as Justin and Brianna would be traveling with the real Etzel and Pia through Xanth, keeping wary eyes out for mischief. Indeed, there was mischief to avoid, because the drivers of other cars all seemed to believe that the whole road belonged only to them, and that all others were illicit intruders. They honked their horns, and nudged in too close at high speed, and made hand signals that Chlorine discovered related to stork signaling in a negative manner. But Nimby, forewarned, ignored them and stayed out of their way. That seemed to satisfy them. They roared on by. Kim had said there was something called a speed limit, but Chlorine must have misunderstood, because no vehicle on the road was honoring any possible limit. They were traveling north to the Apple-Laking Mountains, where they could see the sights and camp for the night. Doug and Kim had camping equipment in their car, but the first night they would stay at a motel, so as to be able to find the best place in the mountains the next morning. After several hours, Chlorine's thighs were getting tired of the unfamiliar bouncing. She knew how to ride a dragon, but this cycle had a different feel, and there was less leeway to fidget. She was glad when the mountains loomed, knowing the trip was nearing its end. They pulled into the mundane motel and saw about getting a set of rooms, which turned out to be nice enough. They would go out to a Fleet Fair place for a meal. But first Kim set up her notebook computer so Chlorine could check in. She had done so in the morning, but that had been early, and there might be a response now. She navigated the grid and mesh, but then had a problem. She couldn't get into the ozone. She got an error message. Not available at this time. Let me see that, Kim said. She tried it and got the same message. Must be a problem in the mesh. These things happen. We can try again after eating. They went to the eatery. It was shaped like a vehicle called a bus, but was larger. Signs all around proclaimed the wares. They got really weird long sandwiches called submersibles, stuffed with every kind of oddity, but they tasted good enough. Back at the motel, they tried the mesh again. They still could not get past the error message. Kim tried to query the mesh server, but couldn't get a coherent response. They don't believe in magic, she said, grimacing. Nimby looked unsettled. Chlorine knew what was on his mind. He didn't like having his contact with Xanth cut off. He wasn't sure it was coincidence. These things happen all the time, Doug said. Sometimes the server gets overloaded and is down for hours or days. There's no malice in it, just inadequacy for the demand. Or there can be a hardware or software hitch. Nobody likes it, but soon enough service is restored, and the mesh proceeds as usual.
Nimby made a trace shake of his head. That was enough for Chlorine.
Nimby has very little magic here in Mundania, but he's very smart, and he can tune in on much that is going on around him. That's why he can avoid bad drivers. He believes that this is not coincidental mischief.
Doug frowned. We need to get this straight. Kim and I can handle routine, mundane problems, but if there's something else, we'll have to be more careful. Just how sure is Nimby about this?
And just how much of what kind of magic does he have in Mundania? Kim added.
Chlorine had ascertained this soon after they arrived in Mundania, but hadn't thought it relevant.
He has no direct power of magic here, but can do just a little thought projection, enough to let me know what he wants when he touches me, and can extend his awareness some distance out. He can judge whether a thing is natural or contrived. The interruption of the ozone interface is beyond his range of certainty, but is suspicious.
What makes it suspicious? Doug asked.
Each demon is fiercely jealous of his territory when it is part of a bet, and guards it rigorously, even if he doesn't care about the welfare of the creatures within it. If the demon Earth realizes that Nimby is here now, he will surely try to embarrass him in some way. The ozone interruption could be the first step in such an embarrassment.
Embarrassment? Kim asked.
Like saying, ha-ha, I caught you? No, like trying to trap Nimby here so he can't return to Xanth right away and will lose the bet. That would mean that Etzel could not return to his body in Mundania, and probably that Pia and I could not exchange places either, not until the contest is done.
Just what form would a consignment to Mundania contest take? Doug asked. I mean, it can hardly go on forever. There must be some limit.
3 days after the challenge is made, the demon Earth would seek to hold Nimby that time, and Nimby would have to return to Xanth within that time, or lose.
What would that do to Nimby?
A demon can't be physically hurt, but it would prevent him from defending his status among demons, and that would be a penalty sacrificing what has taken him 1,000 years to achieve. The demon Earth would assume his status and become the closest analogy would be the leader of the demons.
I thought I had this figured out, but maybe not, Doug said. How far would the demon Earth go to accomplish this?
We're not sure. It depends on his judgment of the likelihood of success. If he tries to trap Nimby and fails, he would lose significant status himself, more than if he just lets Nimby escape without challenge. So he is likely to mask his effort, making it seem like chance mishap, so that if he fails, there will be no consequence to him. He will play it that way until he discovers a better opportunity to succeed. Then, if assured of success, he will do what he judges necessary to accomplish it. That could be severe.
Just how much power does he have?
Kim asked.
Can he do magic too?
No magic. He uses science. He can't make people do things, but can affect Earth processes, such as the weather.
He can make thunderstorms?
At least.
But a storm shouldn't stop Nimby from returning to Xanth, Doug said.
That depends on the storm.
Kim pursed her lips.
You don't mean just rain. You mean like hurricanes.
If those are very big storms, yes, and shaking of the ground.
Earthquakes?
Yes, and similar effects. It could get awkward for local residents.
Such things kill local residents, Doug said.
I doubt the demon Earth would care, so it will be better if it doesn't come to that. And the best way to see that it doesn't is to ensure that Nimby can return to Xanth at will, so that there is no point in trying to trap him here.
Got it, Doug said. So maybe this zone interface problem isn't the demon Earth's work, but just in case it is, we need to explore our options. Are there other ways to return to Xanth?
Other than through the grid and mesh? I think so.
Nimby touched her hand. Information flowed from him.
And there are other ways within the grid, Chlorine amended. Those would be easier.
Other ways?
Kim asked. Through the Xanth zone, Chlorine said, assimilating Nimby's plan.
But those aren't real Xanth people, Kim said. They're mundanes with pretenses.
Not entirely. They can't use Xanth identities without the assent of the real folk there. There has to be an affinity, or it doesn't take. Hoo boy, Doug said. You mean there really is a connection between, say, the Zone Irene and Queen Irene? A tenuous one. It's... Chlorine concentrated, trying to handle a concept that was well within Nimby's scope, but somewhat beyond hers. Like quantity physicals, the Halloween connection between the two aspects of a dividend photo. Doug angled his head, working on that. May I? He asked, after a moment, extending his hand toward Nimby. Nimby touched his hand. Got it, Doug said. Like quantum physics, the spooky connection between the two aspects of a divided photon. What happens to one is reflected in the other, instantaneously, though there is no apparent association between them. Even Einstein had a problem with that because...
Doug,
Kim murmured. He smiled. Okay. The point is, there can be devious connections between two things having a common origin, such as bits of light or Queen Irene. The Xanth Zone folk associate with their Land of Xanth counterparts, but it's not direct.
So they can't just say, better half, send help, and have it understood, Kim said.
Right, Doug agreed, for now he had the full import of Nimby's thought. But in quantum physics, sometimes you can do on a mass scale what you can't do in a single instance. If many Xanth Zone equivalents send a message, some may get through.
Like scattershot, Kim said. Got it. So what's the message?
It has to be masked, Chlorine said, so as not to be obvious and thus alert Earth.
Who?
Kim asked.
Sorry.
Demon Earth, or D-Earth. We don't know whether he is watching the gigagrid, but better not chance it. So it has to be something that isn't obvious, but will be understood in Xanth. Coded, Doug agreed. Seeming innocent to those who don't know the background, but an immediate alert in Xanth.
Okay,
Kim said.
So what's the message?
To GM, Nimby eats dust, Chlorine said.
To Giant Motors? What do they...
Kim paused.
The good magician. I get it. But is that enough?
It contains the problem and the solution, Chlorine said. In your vernacular, as we understand it, eating dust is to be in trouble.
Close enough,
Kim agreed. But what's the solution? To fetch magic dust, which carries the magic of Xanth. If some of that can be sent to Nimby, he will recover some of his power and be able to do what he needs to.
Oh, I see. In Xanth, Nimby is the source of magic, but he's in Etzel's mundane body, so lacks most of his magic. But with the dust, it would be like a little bit of Xanth, an island in Mundania.
Yes, with that, he would be proof against Earth, for a while, and could continue his exploration without concern.
Got it,
Kim said, echoing Doug's comment.
Let's get the message out.
She typed in the address and made her way to the Xanth Zone, doing it for Chlorine because she was much faster. This is Sam and Ella with a public message, non-spam, for all Xanth Zone regs. Please send these 4 words to your namesakes only. GM, Nimby eats dust. She looked up.
Anything else?
Better clarify that it isn't done via the keyboard, Doug said.
Oh, yes,
she typed again. This is AFK effort. Will they understand? Chlorine asked anxiously.
We'll have to hope they do,
Kim said.
We can't clarify it online, because that could alert Earth, but they'll be discussing it privately, and a number should catch on and spread the word. Then they'll go to it with a will. What each wants most is to have a genuine contact with Xanth. They should enjoy making the effort, even if they don't get through.
How will we know they're doing it? Chlorine asked.
Kim laughed. No problem there. They're already doing it. Look.
She turned the screen so that Chlorine and Nimby could see it. Mela Merwoman. I sent it. I think I got through. Electra. I tried. Don't think so. Draco Dragon. We winged monsters are taking off. Chlorine. Couldn't make contact. We'll try again. : end parenthesis. That's me, Chlorine said, with a mixed thrill.
That's why she couldn't get through, Kim said. You're not in Xanth at the moment.
Yes, so she's honest. What's that punctuation?
You read it sideways. It's a face. The : is the two eyes, the dash is the nose, and the end parenthesis is the mouth.
Oh, it's smiling.
Yes, Kim said. They can smile or frown or make variant expressions. Some get pretty sophisticated. It's a way of conveying emotions in lieu of the facial expressions we can't see. What this means is that they are getting on it, and word is spreading.
But if they're writing about it on the screen, won't that alert Dirth?
Kim nodded. Probably so, but he won't be able to do anything about it, because there will be too many to catch. He can't shut down the whole gigagrid.
Nimby touched Chlorine. Actually, he could shut it down, she said, because electrical effects are part of his power. But Nimby thinks he won't, because he can't be sure this isn't just a game similar to others the Zoners play, and there would be quite a reaction if the whole grid collapsed. Dirth doesn't like to be obvious any more than Nimby does. It's bad demon form. He prefers to let the ants play out their antics on their own.
The demons see people as ants?
Kim asked. When they notice them at all, Chlorine said, except for Nimby. When he had to participate as a mortal creature and win one tear of love or grief, he got to know some of us, and now he accepts us as people in our own right. She smiled at Nimby, loving him. But the other demons would step on us without knowing or caring. We're just an infestation in their territories. Well, at least we know where we stand, Doug said, shrugging. Now we've set the ball rolling. We can get on with our camping trip. Chlorine looked at Nimby, who nodded. Yes, we can have the fun we planned on, knowing that Dirth won't be able to interfere. They rode and drove to the nearby mountains, surveying the situation. The mountains were impressive. They would be able to disappear into their green forest and get the feel of mundane nature. That was part of what Nimby really wanted. They would come out here in the morning with their camping gear and have days and nights in the wilderness. They returned to the motel and relaxed. They watched the mundane gourd. Nimby paid special attention to the news, learning everything he could about this realm. They finished on a public service channel, which had a nature program about the pollution of the sea. Why do they despoil it? Chlorine asked. Xanth is so much nicer. People are short-sighted, Doug said, and corporations care for nothing but making more money. But folk are beginning to be aware, and things are starting to be done. Chlorine managed to get through her insulin shot without too much discomfort or messiness. But this is a pain, she told Nimby. I'd rather be rid of it. Nimby looked at her. She nodded. Yes, why don't you abolish it? When you get your magic, it wouldn't be hard to get rid of the diabetes and maybe trim down some of the fat on this torso. As appreciation for letting me use this body. It would be a nice gesture. Nimby nodded. Later, when they were alone and in their room and she stripped away her clothing, she had another thought. I wish panty magic worked here in Mundania. It gives a girl confidence. For instance, I could just whip away my skirt like this and freak you out, unless you clamped your eyes shut just barely in time. But as it is, I can't impress you at all. She went through the motions, and sure enough, he did not freak out. Of course he wouldn't have, being who he was, but still, she would have liked to make the effort. But she did, after all, make an impression, putting Nimby in mind of the stork, and this time their summons was more competent than before. That was an achievement, because drear Mundania did not enhance it by magic. They had to do it all themselves. Next morning they rode out to the mountains, checked in as hikers, and set off with their loads of gear along the Appalachian Trail. The scenery was beautiful, and every detail was special. It had resemblances to Xanth, except for the lack of magic. They had to use a special salve to keep the biting bugs off. There was no spell to banish them. There were no dragons, griffins, or harpies in the sky, only birds, and small ones at that. Late in the day they camped, pitching cozy mini-tents and watching the colored sunset.
I had forgotten how much fun this was,
Kim remarked. I hadn't, Doug said. It was the first time I got you into the sack.
That too,
she agreed. Why would he want to put you in a bag? Chlorine asked. Doug and Kim laughed.
Mundane men have this quaint notion that women should be kept, so they try to stuff them into sacks,
Kim explained. And for some reason the women don't like getting stuffed, Doug agreed. It's called the War of the Genders.
And we're winning,
Kim said.
Fortunately, the men don't yet know that.
Chlorine shook her head. Mundania is a strange place.
Well, it's not Xanth, but it's bearable on occasion.
Kim set up her little computer. You can use that with no connection? Chlorine asked, surprised. I thought that without magic, it wouldn't work alone.
No magic. It's a notebook, with a good battery and satellite link. No problem.
Sure enough, her screen lighted and print appeared. She moved through the linkages.
The ozone's back. We can check in again.
Chlorine checked in, leaving her message. All is well. Then they closed, as Kim said it wasn't good to run the computer too long on batteries. But reassured, they relaxed. Dearth had not caught on, and they were not under siege. It had perhaps been a false alarm. Still, Chlorine was glad they had made the effort of contact through the Xanth zone. If Dearth was aware, that might be the reason he was letting it go, realizing that he couldn't entirely block the connection to Xanth. In the night it rained. It was a sudden booming thunderstorm with sharp winds that brought down branches, and the rain was torrential. The tents were well pitched, but a fluke of drainage softened the ground and let a peg on Doug and Kim's tent pull free, and their tent collapsed. In the darkness, in the storm, they couldn't do much about it except huddle under the canvas, and they kept reasonably dry. But in the morning, they discovered that some baggage had gotten exposed to the rain and soaked through. The clothing would dry, but the notebook computer had been shorted out and was inoperative. It would have to be taken to a shop for repair before it could be used again. The computer had been put in a corner of the tent nearest the washed-out peg. The coursing water had made a channel that oriented on that corner with eerie precision, almost as if nature had intended to nullify the little machine. Dearth, Chlorine said grimly. Nimby nodded. They had relaxed foolishly, and now they were in trouble. For Chlorine knew that this was merely the second step, after the ozone interruption, of a program of isolation and containment by the demon Earth. He intended to trap Nimby here, and surely had other mechanisms to enforce that. Nimby pointed at the sky. There overhead was a shape in rainbow colors, but it was no rainbow. It was a full circle with two lines bisecting it, forming a cross. The symbol for Earth, Chlorine said. It is the challenge. Nimby must get out of Mundania within 3 days of this moment, or he has lost. And Dearth has already handicapped him by taking out our computer contact, Doug said. Demonic timing. Of course, now Dearth believes he can win. I think we are not going to enjoy the next few hours, Kim said. Those were surely true words. 10. Robata. Edsel really liked the way Pia had warmed to him during the challenges, and all because he had shown some respect for her mind. If only he had realized that that was what she wanted all along, they would never have drifted into marital difficulties.
Wait for us,
Brianna called. She and Justin were coming through the now unguarded portal.
How did you ever do it? We just saw you talking, and then you were through.
Sex appeal and quantum physics, Edsel said.
We distracted them, Pia clarified. The Guardians were only clones.
For sure, Brianna said uncertainly. They turned to enter the castle proper, now that they were safely beyond the wall. A woman was coming toward them.
"Oh, there's Wyra."
The woman paused as they approached.
"Hello, Brianna and Justin," she said. She turned to the others. "And you must be Etzel and Pia. I am Wyra, the good magician's daughter-in-law." "Wyra can't see you," Brianna said, "but she can hear you."
"You're blind?" Etzel asked, before he thought. "I mean, aren't there healing springs?" He broke off, afraid he was being crude.
"I am naturally blind," Wyra said, "so can't be healed. But I am happy here, and Humphrey and his designated wives are nice."
"Designated what?" Pia asked sharply. Wyra smiled.
"The good magician has had a long life. He married and lost 5.5 wives, then got them all back together. Now they take turns being with him, and the current one, Rose of Rubna, is here this month."
"Rose of Rubna?" Etzel asked. "Isn't that the name of the capital castle?"
"Yes, she lived there for a long time, until she married Humphrey. She grows magic roses. She is especially nice."
Wyra turned and led the way through the castle. A comfortable gray-haired woman met them. Her hair was coiffed to resemble a rose flower. "Hello, I am Rose. Let me feed you before you see Humphrey." They sat down to a meal of rose hips and rosé wine, along with rose potatoes and red gravy. There was rose-scented bread with rose-petal jelly. It wasn't the most conventional food, but it was good. Rose was a good hostess who seemed genuinely to enjoy their company, though they were strangers to her. That was an art not every person had.
"The next step you two must take alone," Brianna said. "Justin and I would only be in the way."
Then Wyra conducted Etzel and Pia up coiling stairs to a dingy cubbyhole. A gnomish man hunched over a monstrous tome. Etzel let Pia talk, as this was really her mission. She stepped forward. "Good magician, how can we get rid of the demon CO2? The little man looked up. His set features softened as he oriented on Pia. She had that effect on men of any age. "My dear, you can't. Ask another question." "But this is the one I need," she protested, her lower lip beginning to tremble. "I've got to have it."
"Please," Wyra murmured nervously, "don't argue with him. It makes him grumpy."
"I don't care if it makes him explode," Pia said, sounding hysterical. "The trees are drowning, and we've got to save them." Etzel stepped in. "Maybe I can finesse this," he said quietly to Pia. This came under the heading of supporting her completely. Then to Humphrey. "What she means is, there is a crisis we want very much to alleviate, and we hope you will be able to provide us a means. Is there some way we can accomplish our objective?" The good magician oriented on him. The gnome's direct gaze was disconcertingly savvy. "Well put. What you require is the magic locket, which is one of the stray artifacts with imbued talents from the ancient city of Hinge. Hitherto only bracelets have shown up, but now so has the locket. Put the demon CO2 therein, and it will lessen his power sufficiently to eliminate the melting, without putting all Xanth into deep freeze." "Magic locket?" Pia asked. "You have seen it," Humphrey informed her gently. "The half-demon children have it. Borrow it from them for your purpose. Now consult with my assistant to arrange your service." "That may be complicated," Etzel said. "You see, we—" But the weathered old eyes had already returned to the tome. The good magician had tuned them out.
"This way,"
Wyra murmured. They followed her out of the cramped study and down the stairs to another chamber. A man and woman, each in the neighborhood of 30, stood to meet them as they entered.
"This is the good magician's assistant, Magician Gray Murphy, and his wife, Princess Ivy," Wyra said. Then to the others. "Etzel and Pia of Mundania, here as exchange visitors."
"Glad to meet you," Gray said, advancing to shake hands. He was a nondescript person who would have been unremarkable except for his magic. "I was raised in Mundania myself. I was frankly glad to get away from it.
not just because of Ivy.
The princess smiled. She had long greenish-yellow hair and blue eyes. I visited it, but do prefer it here in Xanth. Sit down. We must talk. They took seats on the large toadstools in the room. We are supposed to see about our service for our answer, Etzel said. But we can't stay in Xanth for a year, much as we might like to. Humphrey knows that, Ivy said. He always knows, and things always come out well. Your service can be performed in as little as a day, but it is vitally important. Pia began to relax. A day we can handle, but why would anything important be left to mundanes? We hardly know anything about Xanth, really. We depend on our companions to keep us out of trouble. Brianna and Justin have not deserted you, Ivy said. This just happens to be something rather special and private.
And especially suitable for mundanes, Gray said, because you have so little direct connection to Xanth. This is a peculiar qualification, Etzel said. It is a peculiar mission, Gray said earnestly. Are you familiar with the concept of temporal paradox?
You mean traveling back in time and murdering your grandfather? Etzel asked.
Yes. Any change to a person's own present status would be as difficult. But here in Xanth, the rules are different. We can, in our fashion, travel in time, and we don't necessarily honor the laws of paradox. That's what makes this mission so awkward.
You want us to travel in time? Pia asked, alarmed.
Not you, Gray said. Me. But I am concerned that I may do something that changes Xanth's present situation and might not know it.
How would you know it? Etzel asked. To you in the present, whatever existed would seem to have always been the case.
Exactly. I might retain a memory of the other situation, but no one else would believe me. And if I did something that caused Ivy not to exist...
He shuddered. Whatever would possess you to take such a risk? Pia asked, assuming it's possible, which I doubt.
I must bore you with a bit of spot personal history, Gray said. My father is Magician Murphy, who makes things go wrong. My mother is Sorceress Vodney, whose talent is topology. Several centuries ago, Murphy tried to wrest the throne of Xanth from the legitimate king, for which he was retired to the Brain Coral's pool for indefinite storage. Vodney resented Millie the Maid's appeal to the zombie master, and topologically converted her to a book. For this she too was banished to the pool. During the time of no magic, the two escaped pool confinement and made a deal with Computer. He enabled them to go to Mundania, where they could not be apprehended. But there was a price. They had to give their future child to Pewter for lifelong service. I am that child.
But how could you be committed to such a thing? Etzel asked. You didn't even exist.
People of honor fulfill their deals, Gray said. Pewter performed a real service for my parents that enabled them to live good lives in Mundania and enabled me to exist. We recognize that debt.
But people can't be traded for favors, Pia said.
Gray shrugged. Those who feel that way should of course refuse to make such deals, but if they do make them, they should honor them.
So you serve Pewter? Pia asked, unpleased.
No. My service was preempted by that to the good magician. Since this is a permanent position, the matter has become moot.
So you found a way to wiggle out of it, Pia said.
Technically, yes. But I do feel I owe Pewter something. Hence our present agreement. I will perform a significant service for him that only I can do to make up for the service he lost. Because of the delicate nature of it, he is amenable to this, and will consider the deal my parents made to be complete.
Plea bargaining, Pia said. Or accepting reality, Ivy said. Pewter knows he's never going to get Gray full time, and this is a lot better than nothing. Gray's goodwill is essential.
And the good magician goes along with this? She asked. He prefers to have me free of potentially awkward obligation. This will free me. Etzel was getting quite curious. Just what is the significant critical thing you will do? That maybe involves paradox. I will conduct a creature of Pewter's creation to Xanth's past, so she can learn something Pewter wishes to know. The journey would be extremely difficult to accomplish without my assistance, because my talent of nullifying magic is necessary at some points. However, you could change Pewter's past, and therefore his present, Etzel said, catching on. You might even cause him not to exist. Gray nodded. This is not a mission a person would send an enemy on. As it is, I do feel I owe him a favor, and I am amenable to acquitting it in this manner. He knows he can trust me to do my best to accomplish it without trying to nullify him. I have my own reasons to see that the present situation is maintained. He glanced at Ivy, who smiled back.
How do we fit in? Pia asked. We need to provide more background first,
Ivy said. The danger of inadvertently changing the present is unavoidable, Gray said. I will not do so intentionally, but the effect could be just as severe if I made a mistake. But it will be very difficult to avoid that risk, because not only will I be in the past, where the consequences of my actions will not be immediately apparent, but when I return to the present, others may not believe that any change has occurred, so it probably will not be possible to correct it.
I'd be extremely nervous, Pia said.
I am, but this is a necessary risk if I am to acquit my obligation, so we hope to establish a safeguard. We believe that though regular Xanthians will not be in a position to know whether any change has occurred, mundanes who have no historical connection to Xanth may be more objective. They should be able to see any changes, because they are not affected.
That's us, Pia said.
How? Etzel asked. Computer can set up a liaison, a mental connection between us, so that the two of you will be able to tune in on what the two of us in the past are doing. Then if you see Xanth changing around you, you can notify Pewter, who will send in another person to go to the past to try to change it back, or get me to change it back. If you see no change, we will know that I have succeeded in avoiding incidental mischief.
And that reassurance is just as important, Etzel said, to know you have succeeded cleanly.
Yes, the consequences of failure would be no less horrendous for being unknown. Without that assurance, we couldn't risk the mission. Etzel whistled. I wouldn't care to risk it in any event. Pewter has assessed the risk and believes that it is minimal with these precautions. We have to assume he is correct. And I guess we'd better go along with it, Etzel said, because there aren't many mundanes traveling in Xanth at the moment.
And we do owe for our answer, Pia agreed.
So how does this work? Etzel asked. We will go to Pewter's cave, where he will use his power of reality alteration to establish a connection between the two of us and the two of you. You will be comfortable. In fact, you will be able to walk around and talk with each other, as long as you remain with Pewter's sphere of influence. You will know whatever we do, as if you are seeing it yourselves.
Even when you have natural functions? Pia asked distastefully.
The other person, with whom you will identify, will not have natural functions, Gray said. Etzel shut his mouth, sure that no comment on Pia's own nature was intended.
Not have?
Pia asked.
She's a golem, Ivy said, made of metal and cloth, animated for a purpose, alive, conscious, but not fleshly. Her name is Robot A. We call her Robata. And what will she be doing in the past?
Computer is studying the processes of weather, Gray said. He is vulnerable to electrical effects, such as lightning, and wishes to learn how to control them. Robata has been crafted to have the capacity to comprehend magical weather, but needs to observe it in action. Therefore, she is to be sent to observe the Storm King, who governed Xanth before King Trent took over in the year 1042. He had great power over the weather, and she can learn more from him than perhaps any other person. Because talents do not repeat in exactly the same form, this is the only person who can show her this. So she will go there to study weather. You are risking Xanth's very history so that Pewter's golem can study weather? Etzel asked.
Weather is important to us all, Ivy said. Now that Pewter is a nice machine, he will use the information for beneficial purposes. We could use some more information about hurricanes, Pia said. They do millions of dollars worth of damage every year.
Less so when there's an El Niño, Etzel said. But that does other damage, and we understand it even less.
Since our weather has magic components, it's more complicated, Ivy said. So we do feel it's a worthy mission.
Etzel nodded. The weather affects history, too, sometimes drastically. Now we realize that much of this observation will be dull, Gray said, but you will be able to skip over parts. It will be like... He paused, evidently searching his distant memory of Mundania for a suitable analogy. Fast-forwarding a video recording past the commercials, Pia said. Exactly, he agreed, smiling at her. I haven't seen a video in 13 years. He shook his head. How time flies.
When you're having fun?
Ivy inquired. Of course, he agreed quickly. Etzel and Pia laughed.
Those two are definitely married, Pia said. Indeed we are, Ivy said. And here come our children. They are 3 years old now.
3 little energy balls burst into the room. One was in a green dress. She ran into Ivy's embrace, and Etzel saw that her greenish blonde hair and blue eyes matched those of her mother. Another was in a brown dress. She ran to hug her father, and her brown hair and brown eyes matched his. The third wore a red dress. Her red hair and green eyes matched neither. She paused to gaze at the visitors, then went to hug Pia, and that was where her green eyes matched. Pia accepted the hug. She couldn't do much else, but she seemed uncertain. She had never had much to do with children. They were, by her definition, incompatible with sex appeal.
This is Melody,
Ivy said, setting her child on her lap.
The 3 have a joint talent.
Melody began to hum. A vague disturbance appeared in the center of the room. This is harmony, Gray said, setting his child on his lap. Whatever they sing and play together. Harmony produced a little harmonica and began tootling on it, in harmony with her siblings humming. The disturbance became an opaque cloud with projections, in the shape of a model castle.
And you have rhythm,
Ivy said to Pia.
She resembles her cousin Dawn, physically. The 3 together make things real.
Rhythm produced a little drum and beat on it with her fingers, providing a cadence. The music became better defined, though hardly expert. The shape in the center became a castle made of candy. It was rather like a child's drawing, with the walls somewhat askew and the gates uneven, but there was no doubting the cookies and pastries and the gumdrops that formed its substance. Of course, this is illusion, Gray said. They aren't up to solids yet, but in time they will be able to make a real castle of candy.
But there's no chocolate,
Pia said. All 3 girls focused. The castle melted a bit, then firmed up as solid chocolate. Oh, you little darlings, Pia exclaimed, hugging Rhythm. But that broke the child's concentration. She lost the beat, and the castle collapsed into a pile of chocolate rubble. Then it dissipated as the rest of the illusion crashed. Nevertheless impressive, Etzel said. Congratulations, girls. All 3 little princesses tried to blush. All they achieved was patches of red on their foreheads, but surely that too would improve as they matured in body and talent. But now we must go to see Computer, Gray said. I'm afraid we shall have to leave the children here with Wyra. The 3 looked unhappy. Then they began to hum, play, and beat, and a dark thundercloud formed. We have transportation, Etzel said quickly. Para, the duck-footed boat. Plenty of room for them. Ivy considered.
Well, in that case...
The cloud dissipated and sunlight replaced it. The room was closed, without a skylight. The beam appeared from nowhere. The 3 girls jumped down and ran for the door. They will be a handful as they age, Etzel murmured to Pia as they followed. For sure, she agreed faintly, looking bemused. They went outside. There were Justin and Brianna with Para. Boat! Duck! Foots! Cried the 3 children respectively, running to overwhelm the boat with attention. Para seemed to like it. There was just room for the 6 adults, with the children scrambling around the edges. To Computer's cave, please, Gray said. The boat started moving, but it was somewhat slow and clumsy. There was too much weight for the 10 feet to handle comfortably.
I will enhance you,
Ivy said. She put a hand on the side of the boat.
The craft steadied, and the motion became smooth and swift.
That's her talent, Brianna explained. Enhancement. She can make anything do better.
Etzel was interested. If I may ask, what's your talent? He asked Gray. I nullify magic. Of course, I don't use it unless there is a magical threat. Danger ahead, Pia said tersely. Her talent is to know what's inimical, Etzel said, just as mine is to modify or deflect other talents. We'd better check. There appears to be a break in the path ahead, Justin said. They looked. It seemed that a recent storm had washed out the magic markers, and part of the enchanted path had been erased. A fire dragon was lurking there, waiting to pounce on whoever entered the unprotected section. Para halted. Gray got out of the boat and walked to the bad section. The dragon pounced, seeming about to devour him. Then the dragon fell over, whimpering, its tail twitching like that of a wounded snake. These morsels are not for you, Gray told it. Go and hunt elsewhere, and your powers will return. The dragon struggled back to its feet and limped away. As it did so, it recovered, and soon was fully functional again. It turned to face Gray, inhaling. It was about to blast him from a distance. I wouldn't, Gray said calmly. The dragon reconsidered. It turned about and departed. Good decision, Ivy said. Dragons are magical creatures and will soon die without their magic. Gray found the scattered markers and replaced them along the sides of the path. These are depleted, he said. Ivy went there and touched each marker. She's enhancing them, Brianna said, so they'll be as good as new. Etzel was impressed. Neither Gray nor Ivy had magic that showed ordinarily, but when they had reason to use it, it was powerful. That was, of course, why they were called magician and sorceress. The journey resumed. This robot golem I'm to identify with, Pia said. Exactly who and what is she? Robata, Gray answered. This requires some background. 7 years ago, there was a game of companions, wherein 2 mundanes visited, and one won a talent. I know, Pia said. That was Kim. We know her.
That was when Doug helped the Black Wade find a good place to settle in Xanth, Brianna said.
Yes, in 1092. That game required considerable cooperation from a number of entities, among which was Computer. In exchange for that assistance, he was given a number of magical parts, from which he and his mouse, Tristan, assembled Robata. She is endowed by her creator with a portion of his magic ability to change local reality. She can do it only in relation to herself, however, and even so her power is limited. That might be considered her talent. She also has a remarkably analytical mind, oriented on weather, as she is a weather golem. This mission will be the completion of her training and education. Thereafter she will be to weather what Grundy golem is to languages. Grundy? Pia asked. He was made from wood and string, Ivy said. But later the demon Xanth made him real, and he married Rapunzel. Their child, Surprise, can do almost any magic once, and only once. Grundy is a translation golem, so he can speak to and understand any living creature, including insects and plants. It would put him in contention for magician status, if he were a man. But you said he was made real, so isn't he a man now? Ivy was surprised. Why, yes, I suppose he is. And how am I to identify with a creature who isn't alive? Gray stepped into the dialogue. In Xanth, the distinction between living and non-living can be obscure. For sure, Brianna said. Consider the zombies. Robata is animate, Gray continued. She is not flesh, but she is conscious and motivated. But if she's a machine, Pia said. Machines are people too. Your connection will enable you to see through her eyes, hear through her ears, and feel through her hands and feet. You will not have to think of her as alive, if you prefer not to. But we feel it's not a relevant issue. Pia let it go, but seemed unsatisfied. Meanwhile, they were moving rapidly through the forest. It seemed that Computer's cave was not really far from the good magician's castle, and the enchanted path facilitated travel. Before long, they approached the area.
An awful noise sounded. Ooga! That's the invisible giant, Gray explained. He guards the cave.
Pia sniffed. What is that bleeping stench? He doesn't wash often enough, Ivy said, but soon we'll be in the cave.
The ground shook. Ooga!
He has a heavy tread, Brianna said, but he won't step on us. He knows us. She lifted her hand and waved upward. Hi, giant!
Hi!
Returned from the sky, deafeningly. You look great as ever, Brianna called.
The invisible giant laughed. The sound rolled around the landscape, crashing off mountains and flattening valleys. They came to a hole in the wall. Para ran in, and they were surrounded by darkness. Then it opened into a chamber where a collection of junk lay, with a glassy screen sticking up in the center. The boat stopped, and they got out. The children clustered around the screen. Hello, computer, Gray said. We have come with observers to handle the mission. The screen lighted. Hello, Magician Gray Murphy. Who? 2 mundanes who will not be affected by changes in Xanthly's circumstance. Excellent. Here are Etzel and Pia Mundane, Gray said, introducing them. On service for the good magician. They have almost no prior experience of Xanth, and will return to Mundania soon. Excellent, the screen repeated. I am aware of their identities, because I maintain the ozone. There is a message from Chlorine. They suffered an interruption in contact, but later it was restored. They are satisfactory. That's a relief, Etzel said. A puzzle pattern appeared on the screen, evidently for the amusement of the children. Gray turned to Ivy. Why don't you and the children return for us this time tomorrow?
We will, she agreed, kissing him. She turned to the companions. Do you wish to remain here or return with us?
Brianna hesitated.
I think we'd better stay here, just in case. May we use the boat then? Sure, if Para wants to go, Brianna said. He has more than returned the favor we did him.
Ivy departed with the children. Now 2 new figures appeared. I am Tristan Troll, the tall, ugly one said. Pewter's mouse. The other was a tiny woman who resembled Ivy as an elfin princess.
And I am Robata, she said. Pewter's golem.
Pia looked down at her. You look alive. The small figure fuzzed and reformed in full human size, looking more than ever like Ivy.
It is mostly illusion. I am a creature made for a purpose, given the abilities I need to fulfill that purpose. For example, I have been programmed to speak 3 mundane dialects, English, French, and Italian.
You speak English very well, Pia said, evidently startled. Robata laughed.
I am not speaking it here. You are not speaking it here.
But of course I am, Pia said. It's the only language I know. End of side 6. The only language I know. End of side 6. The only language I know. End of side 6. The only language I know. End of side 6. The only language I know. End of side 6.